Welcome to Horrifically Well Read, Bled, and Said. It is my pleasure today to bring you not one guest, but two fabulous guests, Kailee Pedersen and Briana Cox, author of Sacrificial Animals and Indigent, respectively. And I'm so excited to have both of you on the show today and go through some really great questions with y'all. And welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Briana, you just put out, I feel like we had read yours in an arc, but now I'm seeing the cover of Indigent and wow, like love the art for that. Were you happy with how everything came out for the cover?
Now, I was incredibly happy with the cover. I work with the same artist for all of my visual art because, I don't know, if I find one person who I think I work well with, I stick with them like glue and can't get rid of me. So yeah, Yilin, really great job. I was bugging her for days and days about just random specific things I liked, and she wound up sending me a lot of trial covers that was so difficult to pick between, but I finally decided that one reminded me the most of the One Missed Call DVD cover that traumatized me as a kid, so that's the one I went with.
I love it. Hey, that's not a bad problem to have, that you like too much.
Yeah, it
Love
was
that.
a lot to choose from. So I have on my social media, like the actual cover artist, Jilin Zhao. So if anyone wants to work with her, she is amazing.
Yeah, I think people are always like, need to be shopping around and looking for what it is. But I get you, right? If you find someone that like gets your style, and clearly they did if you're had so many that you wanted to pick from. So awesome. Well, let's jump into some questions here. So both of your books deal with bodies under pressure, like physically, socially, psychologically. So I wanted to talk with each of you. What is it about the vulnerability of the body that draws you in as you the writers of horrors like this? So we'll start here first with you, Briana, and then we'll move next to you, Kailee.
Yeah, for me, I have always really been drawn to like body horror as a subgenre. It is one of like my personal favorites, so I guess it makes sense when I'm writing my own horror. I also gravitate towards doing that, and I tend to just really enjoy the themes that come with body horror, where it's just like a general existential loss of control that you can use to analyze a lot of different things, both like psychoanalytically within the character and for more like social commentary. So that's where I felt on that.
You enjoy the gnarly of like getting into it.
Yeah, I'm
Love it.
definitely
And
here for that.
Kailee, good. And Kailee?
Yeah, for me, I think I come at it from maybe more of a racialized and queer perspective in terms of the body and less of a genre-specific perspective. For me, I find that my queerness and Asianness is very much located within my body and also within the bodies of the characters, and that their queerness is expressed through sort of this fantasy of the body, this fantasy of gender and of sexuality. And I was really interested in ways in which Asian woman character in my novel and also the white male characters might express themselves through their bodies or maybe reclaim some aspects of their body through certain actions.
I love that. I love that. And so, I mean, for both of you, the works explore, as you're saying, marginalized people, whether that's, use Asian queer. When you write about people in society that might be usually like overlooked or less written in books, or ones that society often refuses to see, do you feel like there's any kind of, I don't want to say responsibility, but just like as a storyteller, do you feel like empowered to do it? Do you feel like anything that comes with that of just, knowing what you're writing and how you're being so inclusive, anything that comes with it as storytellers is additional that we would want to know as readers that you have to consider? Briana.
Yeah, for me, I tend to prioritize just being very truthful and honest about my own kind of experiences. So both like what my experience is and what I've perceived in others. So I'm not as concerned, I think, with like bearing this responsibility of like, oh, if people read this, they're getting like the queer Black perspective or anything like that. Like they are getting my perspective as a queer Black person, and they can get like River Solomon's perspective as another queer Black person if they want, which is very different from mine. But just like really specifying that like this uniqueness and perspective is found in like those demographics that are overlooked, but are also still like individualized. No one
Highly
is a monolith
personal.
there.
Yes,
Or in
yes.
Indigent is like very personal at the end of the day. So like these characters are dealing with systemic like social issues. Their own individual fears and like how they react to it is very specific and personal to them. So I try to strike
Mhm.
that balance there where like nobody's coming to me for like representation or anything. They're just coming to see characters who act
Mhm.
realistically and honestly.
I think there's so much value in that though. And I love how you put that it's like, okay, yes, I'm touching on these aspects that are within a lesser maybe discussed area. However, it's still these individual personalized things that each person has their own. So, and naming a couple other authors that you can get those perspectives too. So what about you, Kaylee? How would you answer that?
I'm pretty much in agreement with Brianna. I think there is something really exciting for me to be able to express a queer or Asian or Jewish or what have you identity within my stories. But I do think Brianna and I have, separately from this podcast, discussed sort of the burden or the fraught nature of this idea of representation and of that often being placed on like BIPOC and queer authors to
Hmm.
represent their community in some way when we really just want to be making art and telling our stories.
Wow.
For me, I think to aspire to the universal is great, but I actually try to go about as specific as I can and then sort of bloom outwards from that. So, as Brianna mentioned, there are some other authors who maybe share their identity but have very different perspectives. And as an Asian adoptee author, I have a very different POV than somebody like Jane Jung Trenka or Matthew Salesses or Lee Herrick, all amazing Asian adoptee authors. But for me, coming from like a farming family in Nebraska, that's what came into my work. And so I would say for me, I try to identify the specificity of that experience and then allow the reader to take what applies to them from the book. So you don't have to necessarily have been from Nebraska or be Asian or be bisexual to identify with my work. But for anybody who maybe has felt like an outsider in their own family or alienated in their hometown, these are all experiences that someone, even not of those identities, can take away.
Yeah. I love that about reading, right? Because you can read the first layer, so to speak, on this book would be good to anyone. Anybody can read this. If you're a horror lover, you'll enjoy it and it will speak to you and you'll enjoy the book. But then if you happen to be going through these situations or had these moments, like as a book lover, it's like you're getting this kind of version of therapy or being seen or I'm not alone, whatever it might be. And not just from what you and Brianna are writing, but just for any book, right? Of reading the right book at the right time for a personal experience can be so amazing. And then for the other people that haven't had that, it's still really good art, right? So it's nice that you can have that. But I wanted to see, Kaylee, if you wanted to touch a little bit more on that, because I think that's such a point of the burden, right? Of I don't know that I'm, as a white woman having, and I'm not an author, but should I be like, would I have that same burden placed on me where it's like you just want to be out here making great art? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think speaking just for myself, the burden of representation that I was referring to is this idea that, well, there's like a kind of a lot of different things come into it. I think some of that is this idea that because there are so few BIPOC authors, for example,
Hmm.
we ultimately sometimes become, whether we like it or not, figureheads for our
Hmm.
respective communities, even if we maybe are,
Didn't ask to be, right?
yeah, or are not totally similar in all respects to people from the same community. There are ways in which readers can take away messages from our books that are not intended. So there's this like, for me, a lot of my characters are frankly very unpleasant to deal with, and I would not be friends with them if they were real, but they're interesting to write about. And, but yeah, but when you put that into the body of a queer person or an Asian person, there's always this feeling of like, well, will someone walk away from this book and think that this is like all who we are? And
Mm.
that's a burden that frankly like white or straight authors or characters don't really carry.
Yeah.
And then I think also sometimes it comes from within our own community. I mean, I've had, not really personally, but I've had like friends who were queer and felt like pressure to write more positive queer stories because, you know, obviously we talk about like queer tragedy and bury your gays and things like that. But at the same time, like for me, I'm writing horror or literature that's on the darker side of things. So is it so bad for me to write a queer character who suffers? I mean, you know, that's another kind of question that I have sometimes for myself is like, why can I not just have this freedom to do what I'd like? And why do I have to have these competing pressures? Brianna,
Really,
feel free to chime in if you have
yeah,
anything I missed.
yeah. This is fascinating, and I'd love to hear your take on that, Brianna. And I really, I have a follow up question. Like I felt like I wanted to ask anyway, and you just teed me up. So perfect. Go ahead, Brianna.
Oh, yeah, I first just want to echo what Kailee was saying. We are pretty much on the same page with that, I think, at the end of the day. And I want to date this episode and talk about a very current thing that's happening in specifically like Black book spaces where people are discussing Toni Morrison in this light, where it's
Okay.
very like literary, but she's like horror adjacent in so much of her writing just because of what she is writing about. And there's this idea, especially with more modern writers, that we do not want to show like that level of trauma, or like we don't want to like hold space for that because like there's other stories we could tell. And yes, I agree with that, but that is not the story I am telling. And
Mm-hmm.
quite frankly, as a horror author who is more enamored with like the darker side of things, with the more macabre, with my
Mm-hmm.
perspective, that's probably not going to be where I fall. Like, I'm not going to be telling those positive, happy stories just as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Right.
idea that I have to represent these demographics I am in positively or with like these happy stories, I understand
Oh.
the need for it, especially with like queer or BIPOC people who have kind
Mm-hmm.
of been like bombarded with like only sad stories about what their experience
Right.
be. But I am
Wow.
always for people like reading more books, not less. I would like them to read my books and other sad books and also all the happy
Yes.
books they want.
Thank you for that response. Really full of layered things that we could probably spend the rest of the podcast honestly just talking about this concept itself of how to balance that and the expectations and also getting into it. But I wanted to ask, the question was I feel that both of your books really make readers sit with discomfort. And I think that's so important. How do each of you think about the line between necessary discomfort and then trauma for trauma's sake, or just like, kind of as you were saying, Brianna, of just like, okay, I want to tell this story or I want to have this and it's realistic, it's sad or it's heavy, right? How do you find that line? Whichever one of you wants to answer this one. I feel like, you know, with both of you, it's very different books, and but at the same time it's the same themes. Kaylee, do you have a response to that?
My initial thinking is actually there really isn't a line, it's whatever you can pull off as an author.
Okay.
Might be kind of a hot take. I think I'm influenced by works that are considered pretty transgressive, like Nabokov's Lolita, which is entirely from the perspective of a essentially unrepentant pedophile. I say this
Yeah.
as someone who has experienced sexual harassment as a child. Obviously, it's
Mm,
not something I'm, comfortable reading, but Nabokov was a master, and it's pretty clear through the book that he's not condoning that behavior, and it's not presented as something exploitative. You're really entering this mind of this extremely disturbed person. Similarly, there's Jonathan Little's The Kindly Ones, which is over 1,000 pages in the English translation. It's entirely from the perspective of a pretty much unrepentant Nazi. And I say this as a Jewish person. It was very uncomfortable to read, but I do think
wow.
it was important and necessary work.
Mhm.
Little himself is also Jewish. So again, this kind of goes back to our previous conversation. Like, am I going to tell another Jewish person what to write or not to write? And then it's trauma
Mhm.
porn or not? I mean, I think that the line between like egregious and not egregious, or too much trauma or not enough, is so dependent on the reader that as an author, I think you just have to trust yourself because you
Yeah,
will always be getting so many different opinions.
right.
And as much as I understand, and again, kind of going back to the previous conversation, like a desire in the queer and BIPOC and or Jewish or whatever marginalized community we want to talk about to see less trauma-centered narratives. I also feel that trauma can be a very potent part of our personal lived experiences, and that it's if an author of those identities wishes to excavate that in whatever way they see fit, I'm not going to tell them no.
Yeah. I love that response too, right? Because it's highly personal. It's almost like the level of spice or hot sauce of what spicy to someone might not be to another person, not enough. And I love that you're just basically like, I'm going to write the truth. I'm going to write to what line it feels appropriate for my, and however that lands with the reader, it could be too little, too much, or just right. What about you, Brianna?
Yeah, I also find that I enjoy some more like experimental and transgressive literature, especially getting into like genre lit. So I have a very bad kind of like barometer for what other people think is too little or too much of anything. So a lot of it is just like I am going to write what I write. And for me, it's less of like a social responsibility question and more of just a craft question. So is this scene I'm writing contributing something to this story in a way that propels it forward? Is it adding new information? Is it building up complexity to this character? Or is it just some extraneous thing that's there to be there? And that's
Right.
really where
Right.
I try to draw the line with me writing some like darker or more unsettling scenes. Like, all right, what is this scene doing? Is it doing something that no other scene has done so far? If so, I'm going to keep it in.
Okay. Okay. Kaylee, when you mentioned Lolita, I had seen this TikTok of someone having written their wedding vows using a quote from Lolita, and the comment section of, okay, clearly these people never read this book because, like, it's wild because, you're writing it from this pedophile that, and what their like obsession. It's like, can you imagine having, I think a lot of people haven't read the classic literature for that, and previous to seeing that quote, I hadn't read it, and I was like, wow, that's a level of, that's uncomfortable. So yeah, I just wanted to get your hot take on that.
I mean, I think that's just a situation where someone quoted something they didn't really understand the context of. I don't think it has any relation necessarily to the quality or literary
Oh,
merit of
no, not for
Lolita.
all. I just meant, like, the embarrassment of realizing your betrothed is giving you, thinking they're giving you a loving line, and they don't understand the context of the book. So, no, I feel like some of these people have written, the 2 authors that you said, like, I haven't read the other one either, but that sounds like really necessary reading. Like, if you can power through it and take it in. I don't know, maybe I'm just the type of person that I like to read brutal things like that, or absolutely horrific things like that, because I think it's, vital to sit with the discomfort. I'm not opposed to trying that out. So, can you say the name of that author in that book again?
Yeah, it's the Kindly Ones translated. Gosh, I forgot the translator's name. I apologize, but it was in French originally. The author is Jonathan Little or
Okay.
Littell, and I'm just looking up the translator. It was Charlotte
Thanks.
Mandel for
Okay.
HarperCollins in the U.S.
Yeah, it sounds, I don't know if I shared that with you before. I don't think I have, but like I read, really like the author. He was really popular in the 90s, that Pat Conroy. And
Oh yeah.
he writes some really brutal things. Well, in the book, the beach music, it's talking about like the Jewish experience, his wife, and it is, when she's describing like the parents and why they are the way they are, these Jewish parents, and having lived through, I read both books by Elie Wiesel, which were, I thought was probably the most horrific thing I had read. And then I read what Pat Conroy wrote about this. And I mean, I just was like, I think I read like that whole section just like sobbing. And I don't find that I'm someone that likes to cry or whatever. It was just so, oh my God, brutal, horrific, but so vital. So if the book is anything like that, I think that, not that I'm like saying I'll look forward to reading it, but I look forward to reading it, to really checking it out, because it sounds like 1,000 pages worth of really important words being said around a topic that maybe is all too common, or not common, but like seems to be bubbling up in the news, or corresponding with things that are just getting uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that
Hmm.
speaks to maybe again that line between what we would describe as like exploitation versus simply depicting something, literature as the act of witnessing versus
There you go.
a vehicle of titillation.
There you
It can
go.
be very painful and difficult to witness the Holocaust from the perspective of a perpetrator. But I do think as we move into Holocaust denialism and the rise of neo-Nazism and
Yes.
anti-Semitism, racism, and harm to many groups who are harmed by the Holocaust, not just Jews, but also Roma, you know, LGBT, etc., we move into a space where people don't even think it happened.
And last week, now they've since walked it back, but saying that the noose and the swastika were going to be declassified as hate. I'm like, in what capacity would you ever need to use a swastika or a noose that it wouldn't imply death? Like, help me understand that. But it's like things like this, they're almost like these boundaries are being pushed and touched. And so the way you say these books need to provide witnessing, I think this is how you learn. And you see that, like, no, the moment something like this comes up, or the rise to these sort of things, and it has to be stopped immediately and talked about. I don't know if you guys were shocked by seeing that they were like going to try to walk those two images back as not classified as hate speech or articles. Did you have a reaction to that?
I was not personally surprised by them doing that. I don't think
You're like,
this
the
admin can
way
surprise
my
you
jaw
of
did
things
not
they
drop.
did. But it is, I think, relevant to what we're talking about, where like I refer to it as vice signaling, where it's just like, oh, you're just like performatively engaging in this callous behavior to signal towards other people. And I think especially in like the area of media and in the area of media literacy, that like presence of vice signaling is actually really relevant to what we were discussing with like where that line is in discussing trauma. Because I think it is perfectly possible for someone to write something like horrific and uncomfortable for the audience of like the people they're signaling callousness to. And that is not something I want to support. But I do think it's very important to realize that there are lots of people, like myself included, who writes these very uncomfortable or like unpleasant situations. Or like Kailee said, like bear witness to what is happening, where they are doing it for the audience of like themselves or the people who have experienced that, which I think are two very different things.
Yeah. I know when Adam read your book first, Brianna, that he was like, whew, this is a lot. Like, I need to just take a pause. Like, he's like, it's so good. It's so good. But like that is the biggest compliment, by the way. I'm saying that in the nicest possible way of like, you did something to a reader, that it's like, flinching that I want more, but my God. And I think that's a testament to the art and what you're able to put out of just being like, this is a lot, and I don't want to stop, and I want to keep going, but I need to take a break. And how does that make you feel? Like that people when they're reading it might have to take it like in chunks and not just like speed read through, or I think that means like they're having the reaction that you would want, right? Of like really getting hit hard by the art and the moments that you put in.
I think every writer has different goals for what people want like the reaction and takeaway to their work to be. So for me personally, my goal as a writer is I want people to just sit with and engage with what is being said. So like engage with the subtext, engage with the discomfort. And a lot of the times that means reading it slowly or reading it in chunks. And I think that is fine in the terms of me wanting it to be more of a discussion. So I did not write this to be an easy read or a fun.
Yeah.
I wrote it to be cathartic for myself, first and foremost, but also just an expression of things that I have witnessed both personally and in other people's lives who are like close and dear to me. So I wanted to just speak truth to what is happening. And if that is uncomfortable, like so be it.
There you go. And Kailee, like this term of like I've read before is like compassionate horror. Does that mean anything to you?
I actually haven't heard this before.
Okay, so when you hear it, what does it make you think of? Compassionate horror? Because I think it's like it's unflinching, but it's rooted in compassion in terms of like the way I took it was kind of what Brianna's saying is like, or what you guys were the witnessing is, it's like, it needs to be said, it needs to come out, it's compassionate to yourself, it's cathartic to yourself, like I think first to the writer, but it can also be for the reader. That's kind of how I took it. And if that doesn't really mean anything, we can scoot on. But Brianna, does it mean anything to you?
I also have not heard that term before, but just like hearing it, what I at least think it means is like having compassion towards like the character and their perspective. So there is like a lot of horror media that kind of revels in having these characters who are here to have horrific stuff happen to them as kind of just more of a vehicle for that set piece in that like phantasmagoria of stuff. So I think compassionate horror may be like the opposite of that, where the horror is derived from you not wanting something bad to happen to these characters and actually caring for their perspective.
I think I also felt like it meant cathartic in a way of like, just how many people have come on to the podcast and have been like, watching these horrible things happen have like given me a sense of healing. And I just remember the first few times I heard that, I was like, really? Like this is giving you like a balm. And it's like, yes, reading horror, watching horror is very healing. And I think that's what I took compassionate, like almost like as the reader reading one of your books, it's like, it's a compassionate thing to do for yourself in a way, because it's like you're touching on things that maybe you haven't wanted to witness in and of yourself that you've gone through. What's your thoughts on that?
Kailee, do you want to touch on it first since I just rambled a bit?
Yeah, I guess for me, I kind of, I'm not totally certain how I feel about the term compassionate horror, just because, again, I'm sort of wrestling with having just heard it.
Yeah.
I think I tend to think of my work more as like socially engaged.
Okay.
I think I just tend to not try to dictate what the reader's response is, whether it's compassion or revulsion or anxiety or discomfort in regards to my work. I do try to have compassion for my characters, but it's more about like really getting inside of them and understanding what's going on and what makes them work, rather than so much like feeling something for them, because ultimately we can have all the compassion we want, but some of these people are not going to make it out of the story alive. So I think reading horror can definitely be cathartic. It can be something that speaks to fears, and especially when reading the works of marginalized authors, fears that are specific to certain audiences and communities. I've talked about this before, but I think marginalized people occupy a really interesting space in horror because we are both groups or people that are at times unfairly persecuted or treated in negative ways. So we're afraid, but we're also the monster. We can cause fear in communities and distress in others. So there's this sort of dual nature to reading horror where sometimes I see myself reflected, or I understand why that female character didn't want to speak to the police because they wouldn't believe her because she was hysterical. But I also see, in the work of Lovecraft, all these Jews and people of color are infesting New York City.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like, as we were talking a little bit of, just horror as this balm or this vehicle for change or awareness, anything like that, within like some of these institutions, whether it be like medical, economic, or, educational, anything like that, familial, what do you think? Some of these just feel extra monstrous to me right now, right? Like, especially with just so much having changed. And I'll give you some examples of like people like the FDA, it's like, I don't remember a time when the FDA didn't really exist or do its thing. And now when like things are cut back and you're like, well, some of this food is frozen, but it's rotten. Some of this food wasn't inspected correctly. Like I'm thinking about like institutions like that, or just even like, oh, well, these rights are being taken back. Or even like this week, it was professional jobs, like being a nurse practitioner is now not going to get the same funding. I feel like these are some real life horrors of things that it's like, what are you talking about? Like our things have just changed their mantra. So do you feel like we might start seeing more books, or is that an interest of, I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think we'll start seeing more horror books written about like some of these changes that we're seeing through policy and world changes that used to always be like normal, and now like we're not having that? And or is that an interest to either of you to write about, of just like these changes and how that can affect us as human beings? Let's go with Brianna, go for it.
Yeah, I think we have really always seen media coming out, especially from more marginalized creators, that deals with this idea of like institutional betrayal or institutional abandonment. lots of people are like currently having to be faced with very overtly right now for the first time, but lots of communities are much, much more used to, and I think much less shocked that it is happening now because it's been this pervasive issue. So my book, Indigent, is about just like distrust of medical institutions and like institutional betrayal of like marginalized people, like working class people, people of color, by a medical institution that is ostensibly supposed to be helping them, but they have learned just historically that it doesn't. And that institutional distrust and betrayal is like the overarching theme throughout the entire story. And those kinds of stories from people who have very good reason to like be disconnected from these institutions, I am already seeing coming out more. Like I said, I wrote this book like 1 year ago, and I wrote the script that it is based off of around 5 years ago. So it continues to be an ever-present issue that is more salient to some people than others.
Right. You know, I appreciate you saying that because it's like, check my privilege, right? Like, never really, maybe I'm not a part of that community that has been dealing with some of these things for a long time, right? And I think about like, did either of you see, I mean, I don't assume everyone's a TikTok watcher like I am, but the Black woman that was literally in the ER in full labor, like, and they wouldn't take her to labor and delivery, and she was like struggling so bad, and like eventually like the hospital got so much backlash, so many calls, but I mean, this nurse was like, you're supposed to be helping, like you're at the hospital, it's like it was her due date. And the amount of people that have come out and talked about how Black women die in childbirth 3 times more than a white woman, it just, I mean, here was a modern day thing of the mother was recording her daughter in agonizing pain. It was so hard to watch and witness, and then to realize this happens all the time, way more than you would think. And so when you're talking about the medical community for that, did you happen to see that in any, I mean, obviously your book is talking about in places that should help and they're not. Are you glad when something like this surfaces like that? Do you feel like it brings credence to what you're writing about and helps to take away the veil of, you know, other people that have privilege that haven't had to be exposed to this?
I think like personally, because I also work within a counseling space, like I would prefer those kinds of videos not be floating around just from a trauma-informed perspective, where like people who have this trauma don't need to be seeing that. But like at the same time, there's an idea of who is being centered. So lots of people aren't going to know that this is an issue unless they see that. And if we're centering them in their reaction, then those videos floating around is like fine and important. But I think it is a very fine line of like who we are exposing that kind of stuff to. And even with my book, like I am comfortable with that because I'm depicting fictional things. So having like these real life things happening might be much more re-traumatizing than just reading about it in a fictional setting, which I think part of why fiction is cathartic for that reason. But yeah, there's lots of stuff you could look into for it. So like, what is it? Medical Bondage is a book about just the history of gynecology and how it was really a betrayal of Black women in that way. Or like a Blackstock's Legacy, which is her memoir. Like these both go into like specifically the Black community's relationship to like medical institutions and why that sense of institutional betrayal is not new, essentially.
I love this. I love that you guys are pulling up some really good books to add to if they're enjoying what you're talking about, if they enjoy your works. Like this is just ways to really enlighten yourself and read deeper. And Brianna, I feel like I can really see what you're saying of like it could be re-traumatizing, or it can also do double duty of wow, you know, I didn't realize these things were happening. And those of us that do have privilege or have an opportunity to speak up or be aware of it to now want to seek out further things like the book on gynecology that you just said. So for Kailee, your book I feel like uses violence almost like a language. It's very like symbolic. I think it's repetitive, ritualistic. When you think about violence as like a narrative, do you see it as like communication or transformation or something else entirely?
Yeah, I think that violence is primarily the ways in which the men in my story interact with each other. I think one of the central tragedies of the novel is that Carlisle, the patriarchal and abusive father of the Morrow family, truly loves his sons, but is so warped by his own upbringing that he can only relate to them by verbally and physically abusing them. And that leads to a ripple of intergenerational trauma that leads to him and Nick in the very first chapter of the novel looking for the fox that has eaten the hens on their farm. And they find the fox's den and kill the baby foxes they find inside as retribution. So there's this cycle of violence that endures generation after generation and has wide-ranging consequences to the end of the novel.
Wow. As a follow-up to that, Kailee, you had said when we started the conversation here that you felt that your Asianness and your queerness lived inside of your body. And I feel like Sacrificial Animals really takes on the concept that like the body is both the cage and the key. What do you feel like really fascinates you about the body as like a site of horror or like meaning or resistance?
I think it's very fluid and multifaceted because you can have so many relations to one's own body and that can change over the course of an hour or even days. I also think the body is a very potent symbol because for many people, it's something they lack agency over, particularly in certain scenarios like queer people and people of color. We may not be able to express ourselves as freely with our bodies, or we may have a very limited control over them depending on the circumstances or context, to go back to kind of the medical discussion. And then I just think the body is so visceral and such a primal force. It's something we all have, presumably, as we're not brains and vats quite yet. And we kind of move through it every day, but it's also something that we sometimes like can dissociate from or not even think about. So
absolutely,
it's both like ever present and always with us, yet it's something sometimes that often goes unacknowledged.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this is a question for both of you, but it's custom because obviously you both have two different books. But I want to talk about the title. So for Sacrificial Animals, you know, what does the title mean to you? Who or what in your view is being sacrificed, or and for Briana, like Indigent, being extremely poor, lacking the basic necessities of life, like a system that has failed someone. How did you guys, I want to hear like the evolution for how the title came for each of you, and how you feel like that represents your books. Kailee, we'll start with you first.
Yeah, I came up with the title really early, so it kind of didn't change after that. I've had other experiences, like with my second novel, where my original title was vetoed, but thankfully my publisher accepted this title right out of the gate. I think that it comes from my background of classics. So I studied Greek and Latin as undergrad, and the heaviness of the sort of biblical and classical motifs stayed with me. The idea of sacrificing someone, whether it was an animal or a family member, really stuck with me. I think you can think of it as referring to anything from the animals on the farm to humans as animals to the family. It is definitely ambiguous, and I allow the reader to make of it what they will.
I feel like it's incredibly evocative. Just I love how you're saying like you're training in that and seeing how those themes can come out. But then just like even the color of the book with and you're right. I think you can imagine that term with so many of those things, and probably all of them. And individually, maybe one speaks more than the other to someone else. So really like that. Briana, do you feel like the word indigent is not as well known? But I feel like then after you see it paired with the imagery of your cover of your book, it's like you get a pretty quick idea that, as you said, this isn't going to be a happy or a fun book, but a really good read.
Yeah, with my book specifically, I do not come up with titles until it's like done usually.
Okay.
So I believe that's just because I enjoy really having a strong sense of place and like a sense of place as theme. This was called Vacancy for a long time because it's about all of these empty spaces.
Mm.
But then once I got to the end and I realized like, oh, all these characters have one thing in common, and it's that they have medical trauma. I kind of pivoted towards like having something that is much more like medical paperwork focused, because like normal like lay people do not know what indigent means, but anyone who works in healthcare does, because if someone is too poor to afford healthcare, you have to fill out indigent hospital paperwork. So it is literally called
Yes,
like
I did not know
indigent
what it
patient
meant.
handout, and you have to give that to them to hand out. So
Oh my
that is
God.
where that terminology came from, where it's just very
Okay. Well, no, I
hospital.
had never heard the word before, like receiving your book. And, I was like, I have to look this up. And I was like, wow, that just immediately evocative. But to know like this is on the paperwork, that's crazy. Okay. Wow. And this is why we read, right? So we can learn and know all these things. So, and are you happy with choosing that title? As like you said, like you waited to the end and you switched it from the vacancies, but that feels good. I feel like it feels good, but I'm not the author.
I think it really works as a title because like no one knows what it means and they have to look it up. And like
Yeah.
having this entire plot that is about like bringing these characters and their like struggles into a light even though they've been ignored, I think works pretty well with a title that you also have to look up because you've never heard it.
Okay. All right. So anybody who doesn't know, don't feel bad. This is part of Brianna's method to her madness. She wants you to look it up.
It's
So
my 4D chess move.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So as we get closer towards the end here, I want to ask some closing questions to each of you. Obviously, this is not, there could be multiple different reactions, right? Because every reader's a little different. But just from your perspective, one or two things that you would hope a reader would carry with them, not intellectually, but in their bodies after they're done reading it. Brianna, we'll go with you first.
Now that is a bad question to ask me because my book is about parasitic worms. So I just want people to feel like they have parasitic worms again, pretty much. They're just that
But maybe it's
visceral,
like you want
horrific
them
reaction.
yeah, maybe you want them to like expel it, right? Or that
So just the
I don't
general
know.
feeling of like, I have something under my skin now and it is unpleasant was my go-to.
Yeah, but isn't there like a feeling of like, I don't know, I mean, just like expulsion, or how do you get out, like awareness of that? And just saying like, I don't know, I feel like there's a metaphorical of like, do you just walk around like this, or what do you do about it? What worms do I have? Right? Like, what does that actually relate to in real life?
And I think that is really part of just like the sitting with discomfort elements of this book, where nobody in this book, spoilers, gets over it. So if you get over it in real life, good. But also,
Good.
it's gonna be
Yes.
a you problem.
Very good. And what about you, Kailee?
I always think back to an experience I've had, and maybe some people here, those listening, have had, where you're a full legal adult, maybe in your 20s, your 30s, or even older, and you go back to your parents' house. You're in your childhood bedroom. Maybe you're just digging around or looking at stuff, remembering the old nostalgia, the band posters, whatever. And your mom or your dad calls you from the lower floor to ask you to come down for dinner, and you're 12 again. And what does that mean for you? Is there fear, anxiety? Is there happiness? Is there a sense of warmth? Like, what's going on for you? And so I
Wow.
think that's the core of the story.
Wow. Wow. I really like that. I feel like that's really tapping back into something, right? That you have to look back and feel those moments. And if you feel like, was there anything that you kind of believed about your work, or as you started out writing, that changed for you after the completion of your books? Not saying that there is, but just curious as you wrote it and pushed through it, of anything like emotionally, physically, personally, that you're like, felt like this before or thought this before, and after, it's changed for me. And
I
if
think
not,
for
that's okay.
me, I've in writing Sacrificial Animals, I've buried some part of myself that remains on the farm, but not all of it.
Wow. That's amazing, Kailee. I feel like that gives me the goosebumps. It's like, okay. And anything for you, Brianna?
Yes, mine is much less profound, but I did come out as non-binary because I wrote this book. So that's something.
Okay. Okay, great. So you prefer do you go by they, them now?
I do she, they pronouns because of the whole
Okay.
complicated I'm not a woman, but I am a Black woman dialogue going on.
Got it.
So yeah, I had people read this book and they're like, this is a trans thing, right? I'm like, maybe.
Maybe that experience of writing through that and kind of realizing the non-binary, like I've never had the experience to write a novel and have a transformative moment like that, but how does that feel for you?
It was largely just more about catharsis, because like anyone can tell you about like gender identity stuff, like it's never a surprise. It's kind of just good to acknowledge. But with my book Indigent, like it's a bunch of characters who do not feel at home in their own bodies and who feel like their bodies are like something that they should not be and who feel like their body isn't theirs. And just a bunch of very dysmorphic language is used that I think I finally was able to express myself with more. So that was nice.
I like that. I like that. Okay, and then last like actual like question here before we go in and tell the readers where they can find you and whatnot. But anything small, strange, or unexpected or quirky about your overall like writing process or anything? I mean, what are the things I know for you, Kaylee, that you talk about a lot, but prior to meeting you or knowing, like, I did not know because I just don't know many people that sing opera, but that you sing opera. I mean, when both of you are writing such like heavy books too, like is there anything, like I said, strange or interesting about your writing process or ways that you kind of separate from when you're not doing, like, do you use opera, Kaylee, as like a offset to some of these heavier things?
I would say no, because opera is also very heavy and I'm
Oh,
very pretty committed to my performance career as well. So I kind of just do that alongside my day job. Opera really does infuse a lot of my writing though, and in terms of like the musicality of the prose and the text, and
uh-huh.
the sort of sonic quality of the work. I would say some of the stuff that surprises people is that I don't plan anything and I
Oh,
just kind of start writing. Usually later when I'm like farther in, I'm on my third book now and I'm about roughly 9,000, 10,000 words in. I've started to kind of try to write some kind of outline, but oftentimes I really just start typing. I don't really have any plans.
that's awesome. Can you just go in? I'm just curious about opera being heavy only because it's such a physical, I'm guessing. Again, I don't sing opera, but it seems like it would require a lot of physical like strength to be able to do it and put it out. Is that why you mean it's heavy, or is the themes of what you're singing about? How did you apply that?
I would say it's heavy because it takes a lot of extensive training to be able to sing opera, unless you're one of the 0.00001% who are extremely talented right out of the gate, which is not most of us.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right. It does take a decent amount of like physical training. I wouldn't say I'm particularly strong in the sense that I can lift huge weights or anything, but you do have to use your body in a very different way because there's no microphones.
Wow.
And I think it's also just very intense because there's a lot that goes into it. Like most operas in upwards of 4 different languages, not the whole opera being in 4 languages itself, but like the repertoire you have to learn. So I've learned works across like English, German, French, Italian, and Russian. There's a lot of study that goes into it. The art form has been around since the 1500s, so there's just a lot to study up on. And yeah, it's not really like entry level music in the sense. There's a lot of like technique and music theory that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
So and a lot of the operas do deal with pretty dramatic themes. There are funny and comic operas, just like any other form of entertainment. But there's also operas that deal with things like colonialism,
Mm.
LGBT issues and homophobia, really heavy stuff like mental health and like suicide. So it can be really intense, and also just to get through like 4 hour rehearsals, it's a
Oh
lot.
my gosh, yeah. When we were talking about like the body aspect of what, we are our bodies, but like we can also dissociate from our bodies and things. Do you, because of like you're saying there's no microphones, which again, I did not know that either. Do you feel like that's one of the times that you're most in your body, or are you outside of it because you're like thinking through everything in your head? Or,
It depends. I think I'm usually pretty connected because you have to keep everything moving. There's so much that you have to pay attention to while singing opera that if you kind of let one thing drop, it's sort of like a bunch of plates spinning at once. Like everything can fall over. So you have to really be on top of things, like almost like Neo in the Matrix when he slows down the bullets and like dodges all of them.
yeah, okay.
So it's kind of like that. I would say, yeah, I do feel somewhat more connected, but then there's also the element of like falsity where you're performing this character who isn't yourself. So you also have to
Okay.
embody them authentically, which means separating from your
Okay.
actual self.
Okay. And I was this something like I just find your story so fascinating. You're like, I'm on a farm, I'm in Nebraska. Okay. So did you start out with like just like were you a musical child? And how did you get into the opera?
I played piano for about 10 years. I was decent, and I also did some violin and flute, as one does. But then in college, I wanted to move from just doing regular theater, so plays, to musicals, but I didn't really have a very good voice, so I started taking singing lessons. And along the way, I kind of like fell into a ditch and got stuck in opera, so I've been there ever since. So
And you're never leaving. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
pretty
that's awesome.
much. Yeah, by accident.
Yeah. It's impressive. It's love. You're you're a really cool person. I mean, you have all this, like, I never really know what you're going to say. And I always feel like the more you share, I'm like, dang, you're really deep. Like you have these hobbies and these experiences of just from saying like, oh, I studied these works and then my master's in this. And I mean, you have a lot of layers. So I think it's always important to show to listeners beyond just like, okay, your book is really excellent, but I really like to showcase the author themselves. So I hope you all enjoyed listening and learning a little more about Kailee. Briana, anything interesting or surprising with your writing techniques or processes or anything like that, or something that our listeners would love to know about you?
My writing process for like prose and manuscripts is entirely based on me writing a screenplay first. So I work
Oh,
as a screenwriter, just like as one of my jobs. And I've worked as a screenwriter for around 5, 6 years now. So it's been a while. So I, like Kaylee, am incapable of outlining anything, but I can write screenplays. So what I typically do for any story is I write the screenplay first, and I use that as the outline for a book that expands upon it. And that's how pretty much
okay.
all of my works have come into being.
Okay. So y'all are like the definition of pantsers.
Oh, definitely.
Good. Okay. So Kaylee, you mentioned that you're a couple of thousand words into your new project. What should we expect from you in 2026?
So my second novel, which is completed, is The Minimalist. It releases August 18th, 2026. It is for fans of Tar and the Piano Teacher, and is a very deeply personal story of a classical composer's descent into madness and an
Ooh,
exploration of queerness, Asianness, and Jewishness in the world of classical music. If that sounds up
wow.
anybody's alley, it's coming out just next year, actually, sooner than we think, because it's already late November, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And
It's up
then,
it's up my alley. Okay? Like I
okay,
can tell you that. Absolutely.
great. I'm excited. Yeah. So that's really fun. It draws a lot on my background as an opera singer and things I've experienced in the classical music world, and is something I have been wanting to write for a while, because it's about an Asian adoptee, and that's my personal experience. My third novel, which is in progress, is a Western.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
And is that probably going to be more of a 2027 release that you're thinking?
I
Fingers
think
crossed.
probably I work a full-time day job, so I don't want to overpromise. I think I usually have about releases every roughly 2 years, so maybe around
Okay.
2028. Depends on how fast I can finish it, and then it. This is the end of my 2 book deal, so I'll have to see if my publisher accepts it as well.
Got it. Got it. Are you hoping, because I ran into you at the Twisted Spine, hopefully you'll be able to do something for book number 2 there?
Yeah, I'm still working on getting some events together. Probably gonna start making inquiries early next year, but I would love to be at the Twisted Spine or somewhere in New York City, wherever you can find me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that sounds really, really good, that book. Like people get ready to pre-order. And what about for you, Brianna? What's coming up for you in 2026 or 2027?
For 2026, Indigent is actually coming out. So March
Yes, I am
20th
so
is
sorry.
its
I think
release
because
date.
I'm
And
sorry. It's
yeah.
because I've already read it that I feel like, you know what I mean? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Sorry,
other
listeners.
people can get it in 2026, or you can pre-order now if you would like. But yeah, for the most
And
part, I also have a work in progress that's like speculative fiction, dystopian lit. So be looking for that probably 2027 as well, because 2026 is just a bunch of tours, both for the book and for various films that I have like written and produced that are going to film festivals. So I'm just going to be running around all over the place next year.
amazing, amazing. What is the exact release date for Indigent?
Its release date is March 20th, which is World Parasite Day. I did not do that on purpose, but it worked out
Wow.
really well.
That is an amazing alignment. I love this. Are you doing anything like crafty or funky to like pair, like I'm thinking of Allie Russell that she with Mr. James Diggs her own grave, she bought like thousands of worms to pass out. But I mean, like, are you gonna give like do you have any stickers or anything else that you think that you may end up or worms with your book when you're doing any signings or anything?
I do have some very good stickers that I plan on handing out. But
I
I could
love it.
probably be creative, make some like gummy worm snacks or something. That would work.
Here you go. Here's a natural home remedy to expel any worms you may have in your body.
Get that Oreo dirt going.
Yes. Oh
There
my
you
God,
go.
Kaylee, that's delicious.
Oh,
It's a
that
great
sounds really good, actually. But yeah, I'm
Who doesn't
mostly
who
in the
doesn't love
South.
Oreo dirt? Well, if the stickers are as quality art like as the cover, I mean, that's the one that I absolutely want to slap on my computer because it's gorgeous. So I'm excited, so excited for both of you. Really good things that that Kailee, that you already put out for Sacrificial, and then Briana for Indigent coming up. And then for the round 2 for you, Kailee, for the second part, like you guys are writing some things that are just, I feel like, are not to be missed. I'm excited because I've done almost 70 interviews and I just feel like you two are very interesting. The ways you've written about things, like how you've approached the work, the concepts of what you're having in there, it feels like, I don't know if I want to say like fresh or just really niche in a way that like at the same time is like something that I'm close to 250 books read, and I'm like, I just feel like yours stand out in ways of, these are different in the best possible way. So I hope that comes across as like a compliment of, it feels like I'm rambling, but I'm trying to get to the point that like there's such cool, interesting concepts, but it's not just the concept, it's how they were written, what they're said, the perspectives, the lives lived, just the flow and the feel. It's so it's impressive, I guess is what I want to say. It's a overall really good read from both, that got me thinking long beyond just what I read. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. I am glad you enjoyed it to that extent. I'm well aware that I
I
write
mean,
love or hate things, so I'm glad you loved it.
yeah. I mean, like, loved it in the best ways of grossed out and like, this is horrific, but loved it. You know what I mean? I'm glad I did it. Do you guys ever see you two teaming up or something together? Is that ever a possibility, or do you feel like your styles match at all, or is it just more like y'all have been friends since what did you say, you met at a writing camp many years ago, and just stayed good friends, or could we expect any professional work together?
That is a good question. It is not out of, like, I don't want to say it's not going to happen, but I am also awful as a writing partner, so I don't want to have Kailee go through that.
You hear that, Kailee? You're warned.
Yeah, I think it's really, really tough for both of us right now because we both have like full-time day jobs, and I think we
Got
both
it.
also want to focus on, kind of for lack of a better term, our like solo careers.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I would, if maybe something shorter, like not
I was
a
gonna say maybe a
novel.
short
Yeah,
story.
like a short story. I would definitely be down if you had anything you wanted to collab on. But also, like, I think writers are so individual, and even though we're great friends and it's been amazing touring podcasts with Briana, they have so much to say that is really insightful and incredible, and I'm just always excited to share the stage with them. You never know how like a creative partnership will change your relationship too. I think it's kind of like
That's
becoming
fair.
roommates with someone, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I've had friends and then we lived together and I was like, I love you, but like, get the F out of here. You know
I
what I
love it.
mean? I'm
I
sorry,
think
Brianna, but like, you know what I mean though?
no, I
Like, I
listen.
literally like opted out of doing like TV writers rooms because I like cannot work with other writers very well. But I get it.
This is where you're like, I love you enough and I respect you enough as my friend to say I will never partner with you because I want to preserve what we have, right?
We definitely will probably be on more podcasts together for sure, and I love doing interviews with them. But I think, yeah, it's just so tough to know if you would be creatively compatible versus personally
Fair
compatible.
enough. Fair enough. Well, thank you to both of you. And we look forward to the goodness and more things that you put out, and we'll be sure to support you. Listeners, please pre-order Indigent. And if you haven't picked up Sacrificial Animals, please do that too. And we'll be looking out for the August release date too for you then, Kailee.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.